The dump truck backed up the gravel drive at 6 in the morning, beeping into the fog. Cora Lynn Haskett stood on her porch in her nightgown and rubber boots, coffee steaming in her hand, and watched 8,000 cracked eggs slide out of the truck bed like a landslide of shells and yolk. The smell hit before the sound did, sulfur and sweetness, thick as a wet dish rag. Her son Sonny came running barefoot across the yard, stopped dead and said, "Mama, why are you smiling at that?" She didn't answer him. She walked straight into the mess in her boots, knelt down, and lifted one whole, unbroken egg from the wreckage, turning it over in the gray morning light like it was something rare. Behind her, the truck driver shrugged and said the co-op didn't want the liability, said cracked eggs couldn't go to grocery shelves, said she could do whatever she pleased with them. Cora Lynn just nodded slowly, set the egg back down gentle as a coin in a collection plate, and said one word: "Good." Nobody standing there had the first idea what she meant by it. Before we go on, if you're the kind of person who likes stories where somebody gets counted out and doesn't stay that way, go on and hit that subscribe button, and drop a comment telling me what town or state you're watching this from tonight. I read every one. Now, let's get back to that yard full of broken eggs, because Cora Lynn Haskett had a plan nobody else in Coosa Bend, Alabama, could see yet. Coosa Bend sat in the low hill country of Talladega County, a town of one blinking light, one Baptist church with a leaning steeple, and a feed store that doubled as the post office on Wednesdays. Cora Lynn had lived there her whole life, in the same clapboard house her grandmother had raised chickens behind, the same one her husband Denny had painted the summer before the accident that took him off a hay wagon 3 years back. Since then, it had been Cora Lynn, her boy Sonny, and her mother-in-law Bertie Coates sharing one roof and stretching one grocery budget 3 ways. Money in that house had a way of running out before the month did. Cora Lynn cleaned the elementary school 3 nights a week and took in mending on the side, her needle going by lamplight long after Sonny was asleep. Bertie kept a coffee can on the top shelf where she dropped in whatever coins the day left behind, and some nights that can was the only thing standing between them and an empty pantry. It was Bertie, actually, who first said the words out loud that Cora Lynn had been turning over in her mind for weeks. Cracked don't mean ruined. Cracked just means it's got to be used quick. The county tax office had sent the notice in a plain white envelope 2 weeks before that truckload of eggs ever showed up. Cora Lynn kept it folded inside her Bible at the Book of Ruth, like hiding it there might soften what it said. The land, 6 acres, the house, the old hen barn, would go up for public auction in 31 days if the back taxes weren't paid in full. Denny had let the payments slide the year he got sick, and grief had let them slide further after. 31 days. Cora Lynn had done the arithmetic so many times the numbers had worn smooth in her mind, like river stones. Then there was Ottie's Renfro, who ran the feed co-op and had known Cora Lynn since she was in pigtails. It was Ottie's delivery truck that dumped those cracked eggs on her land in the first place. A batch rejected by the regional grocery contract over hairline shell fractures too small for most eyes to catch. He'd offered to haul them to the county landfill instead, free of charge, the day he found her filling wheelbarrows with them by hand. "Cora Lynn," he'd said, shaking his head slow, "you don't strike me as a woman with time to waste on garbage eggs." She'd only asked him to help her carry 2 more crates to the springhouse. What Cora Lynn was building, she didn't announce to anybody, not even Bertie at first. She started small, testing in her own kitchen at midnight after Sonny was down. A pound cake, dense and gold, made with double the yolks a regular recipe called for, since cracked eggs meant she had more good yolk than she'd ever afford to buy whole. She burned 3 batches learning the oven's temper. She cracked her knuckles raw whisking meringue by hand because the mixer motor had died the winter before and there wasn't money to replace it. Every failure went straight into the hog trough out back, and every night she started again before sunrise. By the second week, the springhouse had become something else entirely. Cora Lynn had scrubbed every shelf, hung a thermometer from a nail, and lined up mason jars of separated whites and yolks like a chemist's laboratory. She'd read over and over, an old church cookbook of her grandmother's with a chapter on depression cakes, recipes built for hard years, when eggs and butter were rationed and nothing could be wasted. She copied the ratios onto index cards in pencil. Sonny found her out there one night counting eggshells into a bucket for the garden and asked what she was making. "Something this town's going to need," she told him, "whether they know it yet or not." The skepticism came fast once the smell of her baking started drifting down the road. Bertie's church friend Delphine Ott stopped by on a Tuesday, took one look at the crates stacked on the porch, and said, plain as anything, "Cora Lynn Haskett, you are about to poison this whole county with salmonella and a bad idea." Cora Lynn just handed her a slice of the pound cake, still warm, wrapped in wax paper. Delphine ate the whole thing standing in the yard before she left, but she still shook her head walking back to her car, muttering that grief did strange things to a woman's judgment. Word got around the way it does in a town with one traffic light, slow at first, then all at once, carried mostly by folks laughing about the widow Haskett and her egg pile. At the feed store, men joked that she'd gone into business selling omelets to nobody. At church, the pastor's wife suggested, gently, that perhaps Cora Lynn ought to spend her energy on something with a surer return, like taking in more mending. Cora Lynn heard every bit of it secondhand from Bertie, who repeated it while snapping beans on the porch, and said not a single word back. She just kept a running tally in the same notebook where she tracked her egg count, of how many loaves she'd need to sell. The setback came on day 19. A hard spring storm knocked the power out for 2 full days, and without the springhouse cooler running, nearly 600 separated yolks turned before she could use them. Cora Lynn stood in the doorway that morning, looking at jars gone the wrong color, and for the first time since the truck had dumped its load, she sat down on the springhouse steps and put her face in her hands. Sonny found her there. He didn't say anything grand. He just sat beside her and started sorting the eggs that were still good into a fresh crate, one at a time, the way she'd taught him. 12 days left on the tax notice, and Cora Lynn had lost almost a third of her stock. Bertie came out with 2 cups of chicory coffee and sat on the step on her other side. "Cracked don't mean ruined," she said again, quieter this time, "but spoiled does mean start over, not quit." Cora Lynn looked at the ruined jars, then at the good crates still lined along the wall, wholly near 7,200 whole eggs untouched by the storm. She wiped her face on her sleeve, stood up, and said they'd bake through the night if they had to. That evening, 3 ovens ran at once, hers, Bertie's, and one borrowed from the church kitchen. Over the next week, Cora Lynn built what she started calling, only to herself, the Haskett Pantry pound cakes, custards, egg noodles rolled thin and hung to dry on clotheslines strung across the porch, and jar after jar of lemon curd, since curd used yolks by the dozen and kept for months in a cool cellar. Sonny helped label everything with masking tape and a permanent marker. Bertie handled the phone, taking down names of anyone who'd tried a sample and wanted more. Slowly, quietly, a small waiting list started to form, not from strangers, but from the very neighbors who'd laughed loudest, sneaking back after dark to buy a loaf without being seen doing it. With 8 days left on the tax notice, Cora Lynn set up a folding table at the end of her driveway, right along County Road 12, with a chalkboard sign that read simply, "Fresh baked. Honest prices." She had no sign of a plan beyond that table and whatever traffic happened to pass. Ottie's Renfro drove by on his morning route, slowed, and studied that little table a long moment before pulling over. He didn't say much, just bought 2 loaves, tipped his cap, and told her, almost like an apology he wasn't quite ready to give outright, that the smell alone was enough to make a believer out of a stubborn man. Then, 6 days out from the auction, the State Highway Department closed Route 9 for bridge repair without a single day's warning, the exact route every truck and traveler used to bypass Coosa Bend entirely. Every car, every long-haul rig, every family headed toward the interstate got rerouted straight down County Road 12, right past a hand-painted chalkboard sign and a folding table stacked with warm pound cakes. Cora Lynn had no way of knowing it was coming. She only knew that on a Tuesday morning, for reasons she couldn't yet explain, her sleepy gravel road was suddenly thick with unfamiliar trucks, all slowing down at the exact same spot. By noon that first detour day, Cora Lynn had sold out completely. Every loaf, every jar of curd, every bag of dried noodles gone by 1 o'clock. A long-haul trucker named Weldon Prutcombs, 3 states from home and running behind schedule, stopped only because his tank was low and the closest gas was 2 miles past her table. He bought the last pound cake out of pure hunger, ate half of it standing beside his rig, and pulled out his phone to film himself finishing the rest, laughing into the camera about the best cake he'd had since his grandmother passed. He posted it before he ever pulled back onto the highway. By that night, the video had traveled further than Coosa Bend's phone lines ever had. Cora Lynn didn't see it happen. She was in the spring house, elbow-deep in flour, trying to keep pace with orders Birdie was scribbling down faster than she could read them off the phone. It was Sonny who came running out at 9 o'clock, breathless, holding Birdie's cracked phone screen out in front of him, showing a number climbing by the 1,000. Views, then comments, then strangers typing addresses and asking how far Coosa Bend was from wherever they happened to live. Cora Lynn wiped her hands on her apron and looked at that little glowing screen for a long, quiet minute. By the next morning, cars lined County Road 12 clear past the church, engines idling in a queue nobody in Coosa Bend had ever seen for anything, let alone a folding table of baked goods. Delphine Ott arrived early, not to gawk this time, but to help carry boxes, muttering under her breath that she'd never in her life eaten crow and pound cake in the same week. Ottie's Renfro showed up with 2 more coolers from the co-op and set them up without being asked. The pastor's wife came too, apron on, ready to bag lemon curd for strangers who'd driven 2 counties over on the strength of one trucker's video. 5 days before the auction date, the county clerk herself drove out, not to serve papers, but because her niece had shown her the video and she wanted to see the line with her own eyes. She stood at the back of the crowd a good while, watching Cora Lynn hand a warm loaf to a stranger with the same steady hands she'd used cracking that very first unbroken egg out of the wreckage. When Cora Lynn finally settled her account at the courthouse 3 days later, she paid it in full, in cash, counted out from a bank bag that still smelled faintly of flour. The land stayed hers. The hen barn, empty for years, got new shelving and a proper walk-in cooler before the month was out, paid for by orders that kept coming long after the highway reopened, and Route 9 went back to carrying its usual traffic. What had been a joke told over coffee at the feed store became, within the year, a standing Saturday market that folks drove in from 3 counties to visit, all because a woman had knelt down in a pile of cracked eggs and seen breakfast where everyone else saw ruin. Cora Lynn never did put her name on a sign out front, just kept the same chalkboard, rewritten fresh every week in the same careful hand. Birdie still sits on the porch some mornings, snapping beans, telling anyone who will listen that she always knew, though Cora Lynn just smiles at that and lets her have it. Sonny, 12 years old now and taller than the counter, still sorts the eggs each morning the way his mother taught him, good from cracked, cracked from ruined. Because in Coosa Bend, ever since that truck backed up the drive at 6 in the morning, they've learned that not everything the world throws away is finished.